Hey everyone. So this is our last lecture. It's really a tiny lecture. Just a few things that I wanted to add in that we didn't really fit in the first two lectures. It's kind of like, tying up loose ends. So the first thing that I want to discuss are body planes. I know that you all study planes in math class, geometry, things like that. It's basically a flat surface. Our body in two has planes, meaning we have flat surfaces. And we use those planes as kind of identifying markers so that when you're doing things like dissecting, you know in which area you're supposed to cut, in which direction you're supposed to cut. So here are some of our more frequent body planes. The first one is called a sagittal plane. And basically it's where you have the body divided in a right half and a left half. If it's directly along the midline, we call that mid-sagittal. But if it was offset, we would call that parasagittal because it's not directly in the middle. The frontal plane is a division where you have front from back. A really good example of frontal planes are years ago, an exhibit traveled through the United States called the Our Bodies exhibit. They have it still in the United States, different places, but it got really close to us. And so I took a group of students to Mobile, Alabama to go and see the Our Bodies exhibit. And basically, it's actual human bodies that have been donated to this company, and they inject them with this plastic that allows them to be able to dissect and mold them so that you can walk through and see these bodies in various stages of dissection. And in one section, they had if you've ever been to Walmart and you know how they have the posters that you can flip through, this was an individual that they had cut in little 1-inch sections. And you could flip through these little plexiglass partitions and see what parts of his body would be visible in each section. It was really interesting. It's almost like an MRI would be. And so those were on frontal planes. So you had anterior, posterior. And then across the middle, so that you have a top half and a bottom half, that would be called our transverse plane. So sagittals right and left, frontals front and back, and then transverse is top and bottom. So here's a picture, or here's one other little thing about that. We use the term dissection a lot, and a section is just basically a cut along a plane. So when we dissect something, we're cutting it along a plane so that we can look at that particular specimen. And so here's a picture that just kind of shows the division. You can see the frontal plane, the sagittal plane, and then you see the transverse plane. Another big concept that we see in AP is the concept of cavities. And a cavity is just a hole. It's like a big space somewhere in the body. So in the axial portion of our body, our head, neck, and trunk, we have two major cavities. We have the dorsal body cavity, and then we have the ventral body cavity. And just looking at it, you probably can get an idea of where the dorsal body cavity would be, because I'm sure you've all heard of a dorsal fin on a shark or a dolphin. It's on their back. So we have a dorsal body cavity as well. So here's a picture of our different cavities. The dorsal cavities are the gold color. So you'll see right here and right here, all of those make up the dorsal cavity. And then this maroon color, these make up the ventral body cavities. So you can see that within the dorsal and within the ventral, there's a whole lot of other cavities that are happening. So hold on, let me get rid of that. Sorry about that. So let's look at what makes up the ventral and the dorsal. Okay, so the dorsal body cavity, it protects the nervous system. So we have the cranial cavity, which houses our brain, and then we have the ventral cavity, which houses our spinal cord. So two pretty important cavities that are kind of keeping up with two major parts of our body. So they protect the nervous system. The ventral body cavity has two major subdivisions. It has the thoracic cavity, which is the chest area, and inside there you'll find the lungs and the pleural cavity, and you'll find the heart, esophagus, and trachea and the pericardial cavity. Then the abdominopelvic cavity, which is abdomen and pelvis, those are going to have the abdominal cavity, which has our stomach, intestine, spleen, and liver. And then the pelvis or pelvic cavity has the bladder, reproductive organs, and the rectum. Now, just looking at the thoracic and the abdominopelvic cavity, and then thinking about our cranial and vertebral cavity, think about this particular scenario. If you're in a car accident and after they check your head and your neck and everything, the next thing that they go to is your abdomen, and they mash around all over your abdomen. Why is the abdomen more susceptible to injury? It's because it doesn't have bones. Your cranial cavity has the skull, your vertebral cavity has the vertebrae, your lungs have the ribs, and your heart have the ribs. Your pelvic cavities are surrounded by the pelvis, but your abdominal cavity, which is your stomach, intestine, spleen, and liver, they're just out there. The only thing protecting them is some muscle and skin, and so they're always very careful with your abdominal cavity, and that's why we always hear a lot about internal bleeding is in that particular area because it doesn't have a single bony structure to protect it. Some other body cavities that we see from time to time, and there's others, but these are just some that are a little more common. Oral and digestive cavities, so like your mouth, throat, the nasal cavities. Sometimes if you get a sinus infection, that cavity is infected. The orbital cavity, which is your eye socket, your middle ear cavity, and then synovial cavities are the ones that are around your joints. There are other cavities. These are just the ones that are a little more common. So, one other thing that happens with our abdominopelvic region, since our abdominopelvic is such a extensive area, um, it has been divided up into 9 regions, and these are the 9 regions of the abdominopelvic. If you remember in our one of our previous lectures, I talked about surface anatomy, and when you go to the doctor and you tell them your stomach's hurting, they may mash around. Well, the reason why, and if you'll ever notice, the doctor always does this very systemic way of doing it. He'll mash here, then he'll mash here, then he'll mash here. Then he mashes here, he mashes here, he mashes here. Then he mashes here, he mashes here, and he mashes here. Well, the reason why is you'll notice that if you start screaming that it hurts like right around in here, that's your appendix. Okay. And so he can use that as kind of an idea, a little less invasive way of determining what may be wrong with you. So each one of these cavities has been given a name. Each one of these regions in this cavity have been given a name. So you'll notice over here on this side, we have the right hypochondriac region. Then it's the right lumbar region, and then the right iliac region. This side right here is the exact same thing, but it's left. Now, some of y'all that are really smart may have stopped and went, hold on, that's not the right and that's not the left. Those are opposite. They are based on the patient's point of view. It's not all about you, it's about the patient. So this is on the patient's point of view. So when we say right hypochondriac, it's not on your right side, it's the patient's right side. Then along the middle, we have the epigastric, umbilical region, and hypogastric. Okay. And those are your non-abdominopelvic regions. And those are important that you know these. They're actually on one of the worksheets that you're going to work on so that way you will be kind of prepared to see that on your test. Okay. If you have any questions about any of the information dealing with your notes, please feel free to send me an email or a text, and I'll be glad to explain it a little bit more to you. But if not, that's all for this particular unit as far as lecture is concerned. There will be one more video where I will go over the answers to worksheets. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.